Doping scandals from Canelo to Ryan Garcia, Mike Tyson literally biting off ears, mob ties, draft dodging, boxing legends stripped of titles, banned from the ring, and erased from record books. All of them have stories that'll make your jaw drop, starting with a man who faced an entire nation's racism, Jack Johnson. Let's kick things off by going way back in boxing history to talk about someone who was genuinely ahead of his time and paid the price for it in ways that had absolutely nothing to do with what happened inside the ring. Jack Johnson became the first black heavyweight champion in 1908, and honestly, the man was iconic. He was flashy, confident, unapologetically successful, and absolutely dominated the competition in an era when society really didn't want him to succeed. He flaunted his wealth, dated white women, and refused to play the humble role that racist America expected from black athletes. But here's where things get absolutely insane. In 1913, Johnson was convicted under the Mann Act, a federal law about transporting women across state lines for immoral purposes. Now, if you're thinking that sounds vague enough to be weaponized against literally anyone they didn't like, you'd be absolutely correct. The conviction was widely seen as racially motivated, designed specifically to take down a black man who dared to be successful and completely unapologetic about it. They couldn't beat him in the ring, so they went after him in the courts. Johnson fled the country to avoid prison and continued fighting overseas for years, eventually returning to serve about a year in federal prison. The whole situation effectively banned him from competing at his peak in America, robbing the sport of what could have been even more legendary performances. His story isn't just boxing history, it's American history, and a brutal reminder that sometimes the biggest fights happen outside the ring. And speaking of fighters whose connections outside the ring define their careers more than their actual skills, Sonny Liston. If Jack Johnson's story was about systemic racism, Sonny Liston's is about what happens when the boxing world decides your associations are just too sketchy to ignore. Liston was an absolute monster in the ring. We're talking knockout power that was legitimately terrifying, the kind of presence that made opponents scared before they even touched gloves. The man became a two-time heavyweight champion and was considered nearly unbeatable during his prime. But here's the tea. Liston had some very questionable connections to organized crime. Like, we're talking full-on mob ties that everyone in the sport knew about, but couldn't definitively prove. Multiple state athletic commissions, including New York, straight up refused to give him a license because they were convinced his fights might be fixed. He basically got banned from major venues during what should have been his prime years, forced to fight in smaller markets when he should have been headlining Madison Square Garden. But if you want to talk about a ban that was undeniably, completely, 100% unjust, we need to talk about the greatest of all time, Muhammad Ali. Now we're talking about the GOAT, the greatest, Muhammad Ali, and his ban. It wasn't about drugs, it wasn't about cheating, it wasn't about anything that happened inside the ring. It was about taking a stand for what he believed in, no matter the consequences. And those consequences were absolutely devastating to his career. In 1967, at the absolute peak of his powers, we're talking 25 years old, heavyweight champion of the world, seemingly unstoppable, Ali refused to be inducted into the U.S. Army for the Vietnam War. He famously stated his reasons, rooted in his religious beliefs as a Muslim and his opposition to a war he considered unjust. The man stood on business, said what he meant, and it cost him absolutely everything he'd worked for. Ali was stripped of his heavyweight title. His boxing license was revoked in every single state in the country. He was essentially exiled from the sport for 3 years, from 1967 to 1970, during what should have been his absolute athletic prime. Think about that for a second. 3 years of a legend's career, the years when he should have been at his physical peak, just gone, erased, because he refused to fight in a war he didn't believe in. But here's the thing that makes Ali's story different from almost everyone else on this list. His ban is almost universally viewed as unjust today. Ali's story is about principle, but the next fighter's story is about something even more devastating, having your entire life stolen from you for something you didn't even do. Rubin Hurricane Carter. If Ali's story is about an unjust ban based on his beliefs, Rubin Hurricane Carter's story is about something even more devastating, a wrongful conviction that stole not just his boxing career, but 19 years of his entire life. Carter was a middleweight contender who was absolutely on the rise, a legitimate threat to win a world title, when in 1966 he was convicted of a triple murder he didn't commit. The case was riddled with problems from the very beginning. Questionable evidence, potential racism in the investigation and trial, witnesses who later recanted their testimony. But Carter was sentenced to prison anyway. The system failed him completely and utterly. He spent 19 years behind bars. 19 years. Let that sink in for a moment. He boxed in prison to stay sharp and maintain some connection to the sport he loved, but his professional career was completely and utterly destroyed. The man's story became so well known that it inspired books, a Bob Dylan song called Hurricane, and a critically acclaimed film starring Denzel Washington. Carter's conviction was eventually overturned in 1985, but by then, the damage was done. He was too old to compete professionally, and the prime years of his career had been stolen from him forever. Now, Carter's career was destroyed by a broken system, but the next fighter on our list, he destroyed someone else's career through deliberate, horrific cheating, Luis Resto. In 1983, Resto fought Billy Collins Jr. in what should have been a standard bout, a stepping stone fight for the promising young Collins who had his whole career ahead of him. Instead, it became infamous, a dark stain on the sport that people still talk about with disgust decades later. Resto's trainer, Panama Lewis, had removed padding from his gloves, essentially turning them into weapons. The result? Collins suffered permanent damage to his face and eyes. His career was over before it really began. His vision was destroyed. He spiraled into depression and died in a car accident less than a year later, in what many believe was suicide. Resto and Lewis were both convicted of assault and served prison time. Resto received a lifetime ban from boxing and never competed professionally again. And honestly, good. From deliberate cheating to personal demons, the next fighter's struggles were internal, a battle with addiction that tainted an otherwise legendary career. Pernell Whitaker. Pernell Sweet Pea. Whitaker was genuinely one of the greatest defensive boxers to ever lace up gloves. The man was so slick, so technically perfect, so impossible to hit cleanly that watching him fight was like watching art in motion. He beat legends like Julio Cesar Chavez and Oscar De La Hoya and has a well-deserved spot in the International Boxing Hall of Fame. But Whitaker had his demons, and they haunted him throughout his career and beyond. In 1999, his victory over Andrei Pestriaev was overturned to a no contest after he tested positive for cocaine. It wasn't the only time substance abuse issues affected his career and his life, either. The whispers and rumors followed him for years. Speaking of battles outside the ring affecting what happens inside it, there's one incident so infamous, so absolutely insane, that even people who've never watched a boxing match in their lives know exactly what happened. Mike Tyson. You knew this one was coming. There is absolutely no way we could make this video without talking about the one, the only Iron Mike Tyson, and that night in 1997, a night so infamous that people who don't even watch boxing, people who couldn't name another fighter if their life depended on it, know exactly what happened. Tyson was already one of the most controversial figures in sports by the time he stepped into the ring for his rematch against Evander Holyfield. The first fight had been a shock. Holyfield won by TKO when absolutely everyone expected Tyson to walk through him like he wasn't even there. Tyson wanted revenge badly. He felt Holyfield had been using dirty tactics like headbutts throughout the fight, and he was frustrated beyond belief. What happened instead became one of the most insane, most replayed moments in sports history. In the third round, Tyson bit Holyfield's ear. Not once, but twice. He literally bit a chunk off the man's ear and spit it onto the canvas like it was nothing, like it was just another day at the office. The referee initially continued the fight after a point deduction, but when Tyson went back for seconds, that was it. The fight was stopped. Chaos erupted in the ring with people rushing from all directions. The entire arena lost its mind. Tyson was fined $3 million and had his boxing license revoked for 15 months by the Nevada State Athletic Commission. His reputation, which was already incredibly complicated given his previous legal troubles, took another massive hit. The media had a field day for weeks, and Tyson became a punchline, a meme before memes even existed. People genuinely wondered if his career was over for good. But here's the wild thing about Tyson. He actually came back. He got his license reinstated, fought several more times including a bout against Lennox Lewis, and eventually transitioned into this beloved cultural figure who everyone seems to genuinely like now. His podcast is massive, his appearances in movies are always entertaining, and he's become this elder statesman of the sport who can laugh about his past. His redemption arc is honestly kind of incredible, but we'll never forget that moment of absolute chaos. Some images are just burned into sports history forever. Tyson's issues were about rage and impulse control, but the next wave of banned boxers got caught up in something else entirely: performance-enhancing drugs. James Toney. James Toney was a legitimate multi-division champion. The man had hands, he had skills, he had the kind of boxing IQ IQ that made him dangerous at any weight class. He collected belts across multiple divisions and was considered one of the best pound-for-pound fighters of his era. But his legacy got seriously complicated when the drug testing results came back after one of his biggest wins. In 2005, Toney beat John Ruiz for the WBA heavyweight title. It should have been a career-defining moment, the crowning achievement of a Hall of Fame career. Instead, it became a cautionary tale. Toney tested positive for nandrolone, an anabolic steroid, and the result? The victory was overturned to a no contest, the title was stripped, and his reputation took a major hit that he never fully recovered from. Toney later tried his hand at MMA, which didn't go great, honestly. He got submitted quickly and looked completely out of his element. His boxing legacy remains impressive, but that failed drug test will always be part of the conversation whenever his name comes up. Still, Toney's positive test was bad, but at least it was just one substance. The next fighter got caught up in a scandal that rocked the entire sports world. Shane Mosley. Shane Sugar Mosley was one of the most exciting fighters of his era, the kind of boxer who could sell out arenas and deliver spectacular performances every single time. Three-division champion, Hall of Famer, wins over legends like Oscar De La Hoya and Antonio Margarito. The man's resume is absolutely stacked with elite victories. But then the BALCO scandal happened, and everything got really messy. BALCO, if you don't know, was this laboratory that supplied performance-enhancing drugs to a ton of athletes across multiple sports. Baseball players, track stars, football players, you name it. When the federal investigation went down and names started coming out, Mosley admitted that he had used EPO and steroids before his 2003 rematch with De La Hoya. He claimed he didn't know what he was taking, that it was given to him by his trainer, without his full understanding of what it actually was, but the damage was done. The admission was out there for everyone to see. Here's the wild part. Mosley never actually received a formal ban because he didn't fail any drug tests at the time of his fight. The substances were out of his system by fight night, or the testing just wasn't sophisticated enough to catch what he was using. But the admission forever changed how people view his legacy. Mosley admitted to using and avoided formal punishment, but the next fighter got caught red-handed and watched his promising career start to crumble. Fernando Vargas. Fernando Vargas was supposed to be the future of boxing. Young, talented, exciting, charismatic. He had absolutely everything going for him and was being groomed as the next big Mexican-American superstar. Then came his 2002 fight against Oscar De La Hoya, which he lost by TKO in a competitive battle. And then came the drug test results that changed everything. Vargas tested positive for anabolic steroids after the fight and was suspended by the Nevada State Athletic Commission. It was a devastating blow to his reputation and his career trajectory, confirmation for his critics and heartbreak for his fans. He tried to come back, fought a few more times, but he was never quite the same fighter afterward. The hunger seemed different, the confidence shaken. What makes Vargas's story particularly sad is that he had so much potential. He could have been one of the defining fighters of his generation, a crossover star who transcended the sport. Instead, he became another example of how shortcuts can derail even the most promising careers. Another cautionary tale that gets brought up whenever young fighters are tempted to take the easy way out. Vargas got caught with drugs in his system, but the next fighter got caught with something far more sinister, something that literally turned his fists into weapons. Antonio Margarito. In 2009, right before Margarito was supposed to fight Shane Mosley, California State Athletic Commission officials inspected his hand wraps and found something that absolutely should not have been there. A plaster-like substance that would have essentially turned his fists into concrete weapons. The fight went on after the wraps were replaced, and Mosley knocked him out in a satisfying bit of karma, but the damage to Margarito's reputation was permanent and irreversible. He received a one-year ban, but the bigger question immediately became, had he done this before? Specifically, people started wondering about his brutal 2008 victory over Miguel Cotto, where he inflicted absolutely horrific damage to Cotto's face. The beating was so severe that it raised eyebrows even at the time. Cotto himself demanded a rematch and got his revenge in 2011, battering Margarito so badly that the fight was stopped due to a completely closed eye. But the suspicion will always hang over Margarito's entire career. Some cheating is so egregious that no comeback can ever fully repair the damage to your reputation. Margarito got caught with loaded wraps. The next fighter blamed something far more common and far more controversial as a defense: Eric Morales. Erik Morales is a legitimate legend, 3-division world champion, wars with Manny Pacquiao that are still talked about and rewatched today, a true warrior in the ring who never backed down from anyone. His trilogy with Pacquiao is considered one of the greatest rivalries in modern boxing history. So when he tested positive for clenbuterol in 2012 before a scheduled rematch with Danny Garcia, it was a really big deal. Morales received a 2-year ban, which at his age basically accelerated the end of his career. He was already in the twilight, and 2 years on the sidelines was essentially a death sentence for his competitive viability. His defense: contaminated meat. This is actually a pretty common claim from Mexican fighters because clenbuterol is sometimes used illegally in livestock there, and contamination is a documented, scientifically proven issue. Whether you believe the contaminated meat defense or not, and honestly, reasonable people can disagree, Morales' legacy remains largely intact. His 3 fights with Manny Pacquiao are still considered some of the greatest battles in boxing history, the kind of wars that defined an era, but the ban added an asterisk to his late career that probably didn't need to be there. Morales claimed contaminated meat, a defense that would become increasingly common, but the next fighter couldn't blame his food. He just kept failing tests over and over. Antonio Magic Man. Tarver had one of the greatest single moments in boxing history when he knocked out Roy Jones Jr. and then delivered that iconic line to the cameras. "You got any excuses tonight, Roy?" It was legendary trash talk at the perfect moment, the kind of clip that gets replayed forever. But his later career was plagued by failed drug tests that seriously tarnished his reputation and legacy. Tarver had multiple positive tests throughout the 2000s for substances including anabolic steroids and synthetic testosterone. Each positive test led to suspensions and overturned results, creating a pattern of behavior that's really hard to defend or explain away. Once is a mistake, twice is suspicious, multiple times is a pattern that speaks for itself. His upset of Roy Jones Jr. will forever be remembered, immortalized in highlight reels and boxing documentaries, but so will the doping issues that clouded his legacy in the final chapters of his career. Sometimes the bad choices you make at the end can overshadow the incredible achievements that came before, and that's the unfortunate reality of Tarver's story. Tarver kept failing tests late in his career. The next fighter's positive test cost him a championship he'd just won. Guillermo Jones. Guillermo Jones had a solid career as a cruiserweight champion, a respected fighter who'd worked his way up through the ranks. His biggest moment came in 2013 when he defeated Denis Lebedev for the WBA cruiserweight title. It was a significant win against a dangerous opponent that should have elevated his profile internationally and set up bigger paydays. Instead, Jones tested positive for furosemide, a diuretic that can be used to mask other substances in drug testing. The result was overturned to a no contest, and Jones was stripped of the title he'd just won. Everything he'd fought for in that ring was erased with a single test result. His career never really recovered from the scandal. It's a reminder that sometimes the cover-up is just as damaging as whatever you're trying to hide. Using masking agents is basically an admission that you have something to hide, something you don't want the testers to find. Commissions take it very seriously for exactly that reason. Jones got caught with masking agents. The next fighter's repeated positive tests cost him fights against the biggest names in heavyweight boxing. Alexander Povetkin. Alexander Povetkin was supposed to be Russia's great heavyweight hope, a former Olympic gold medalist who had the skills and power to compete with the best in the world. His amateur pedigree was impeccable, and he looked like a legitimate threat to anyone in the division. And then the drug tests started coming back positive, and everything fell apart. In 2016, Povetkin tested positive for Ostarine before a scheduled fight with Deontay Wilder for the WBC heavyweight title. That fight was canceled, costing both fighters millions of dollars and fans a potentially exciting matchup. Then, in 2017, he tested positive for meldonium, a substance that had recently been banned. The WBC issued an indefinite ban, essentially blacklisting him from their title fights forever. Povetkin's career continued despite these setbacks. He later faced and lost to Anthony Joshua, got knocked out by Dillian Whyte twice, but the multiple positive tests raised serious questions about the legitimacy of his performances. When you pop for different substances multiple times across multiple years, it becomes really hard to give you the benefit of the doubt about anything. Povetkin's repeated failures kept him from the biggest fights. The next fighter's ban came at the very end of what had been a celebrated career, Amir Khan. Amir Khan was a star in every sense of the word. Olympic silver medalist at just 17 years old, world champion, fought absolutely everyone from Manny Pacquiao to Canelo Alvarez, regardless of weight disadvantages. The British fighter was one of the most recognizable names in boxing for years, willing to take on any challenge and put on exciting shows for the fans. And then, right at the very end of his career, everything fell apart. After his 2022 loss to Kell Brook in a long-awaited British grudge match, Khan tested positive for ostarine and received a 2-year ban. By this point, he had already basically announced his retirement, so the ban felt like salt in the wound rather than a career-ending penalty. The timing was cruel. His legacy was already written, and then this asterisk got added at the very end. Khan maintained his innocence throughout the process, but the ban stands as the official end to his professional career. It's a disappointing way for someone with such a celebrated career to go out, with questions about doping hanging over his final fight instead of a proper farewell. Khan's ban came at career's end. The next fighter was in his absolute prime when the positive test threatened everything. Saul Canelo Alvarez. Canelo Alvarez is arguably the biggest star in boxing today, the face of the entire sport. Undisputed generational talent, face of boxing for years. His resume is absolutely stacked with wins over elite competition at multiple weight classes. So when he tested positive for clenbuterol in 2018, the entire boxing world held its breath, wondering what would happen next. Canelo received a 6-month suspension from the Nevada State Athletic Commission, which forced the postponement of his highly anticipated rematch against Gennady Golovkin. The GGG-Canelo rivalry was supposed to be the biggest thing in boxing, the fight everyone wanted to see. His defense? Contaminated meat. Now, here's where it gets complicated. Clenbuterol is actually a documented issue in Mexican beef production, where it's sometimes used illegally to promote lean muscle growth in cattle. Multiple athletes across different sports have tested positive for trace amounts after eating meat in Mexico. Given that the amounts found in Canelo's system were indeed consistent with contamination rather than intentional performance enhancement, many people accepted this explanation. The short suspension and Canelo's absolutely dominant performances since then suggest that most of the boxing world has moved on. He became undisputed super middleweight champion, cleaning out an entire division, and continues to be one of the highest paid athletes in all of sports. The positive test will always be part of his story. Canelo's suspension was brief and his comeback dominant. The next fighter's story is one of the most dramatic redemption arcs in recent sports history. Tyson Fury. Tyson Fury's story is one of the most dramatic, most emotional, most genuinely inspiring redemption arcs in recent sports history, and honestly, in recent sports history period. The Gypsy King shocked the entire world in 2015 by defeating the long-reigning Vladimir Klitschko to become the unified heavyweight champion. It was supposed to be the beginning of a dominant era, the coronation of a new king, and then everything fell completely apart. Fury tested positive for nandrolone in 2015, which started an investigation, but the drug test was almost secondary to what was happening in Fury's personal life. He admitted to struggling with cocaine use. He was dealing with serious debilitating depression that made him not want to get out of bed. He ballooned up in weight, at one point reportedly reaching nearly 400 pounds. He was out of the ring for nearly 2 years, and honestly, a lot of people thought his career, and maybe more importantly, his life, was in serious jeopardy. The ban was eventually backdated, meaning Fury served his suspension time retroactively while he was dealing with his personal issues. But the real battle wasn't with any athletic commission, it was with his own demons. Fury has been incredibly open about this struggle, talking publicly about suicidal thoughts and the darkness he went through in ways that professional athletes rarely discuss. What makes Fury's story remarkable is what happened next. He got clean. He got back in shape through grueling training. He addressed his mental health publicly and became an advocate for others struggling. And he came back to defeat Deontay Wilder in one of the most anticipated trilogies in recent memory. That first comeback fight against Wilder, where Fury got up from 2 knockdowns that looked absolutely career-ending, is one of the most dramatic moments in boxing history. His openness about mental health struggles has made him a beloved figure far beyond the boxing world. His comeback is legitimately inspirational for anyone who's ever faced their own dark times. Say what you want about the man. Fury's story proves it's never too late to turn things around. Fury's comeback was inspirational. Our final story is the most recent controversy. A young star whose biggest win got completely erased. Ryan Garcia. This story is still fresh, still developing, and it's dominated sports news and social media for weeks on end. In 2024, Garcia pulled off a massive upset over Devin Haney, dropping him multiple times en route to a majority decision victory. Garcia had been written off by so many people. Training camp drama, erratic social media behavior that had fans genuinely concerned about his well-being, the weight miss that cost him the official title shot, and then he went out there and made Haney look like he didn't belong in the same ring. It was supposed to be the biggest moment of his career, the validation he'd been seeking, proof that all the doubters were wrong. Instead, he tested positive for ostarine. The win was overturned to a no contest. Garcia received a 1-year suspension from the New York State Athletic Commission. His win bonus was returned. Everything erased like it never happened. Just like that, one of the most shocking upsets of the year became an asterisk, a footnote in the record books. Garcia has vehemently denied intentionally taking anything, calling it a setup and questioning the testing protocols. His defense has been emotional and chaotic, playing out across social media for millions of followers to witness. But the positive test is undeniable. Science is science, regardless of how the substance got into his system. What makes this situation even more complicated is Garcia's very public mental health struggles, which he's documented extensively online for his massive following. Some wonder if the erratic behavior and positive test are connected somehow. It raises uncomfortable questions about mental health, athletic performance, and substance use that don't have easy answers. Check out our other content by clicking on the boxes on the screen. Until next time, peace.